Well, hello, today is an exciting day because I am finally planting some perennials out here in this new bed. So if you remember, a few weeks ago I posted a video that I added flower beds to my front entry. The driveway kind of close to the road. I live on a highway, so it can be kind of busy. You're gonna hear traffic, and that's what I'm trying to screen from. But now that I've added in the trees that will eventually be more screening, so some Lindsay Skyward Bald Cypress, some Skylands Oriental Spruce, I now want to add in some perennials. Now out here, the conditions are harsh. So I'm picking perennials that can really withstand south winds in the summer, which will be heat, dry, hot winds, but can also be tolerant to those drought conditions in the ground once established. So you can see here on the back, I got loaded up with plants. You can see that I'm picking kind of palettes that I love anyway. So there's going to be a lot of cat's pajamas. I love this catmint. It's a Nepeta, so it's cat's pajamas, which means it's a newer variety, so it stays slightly more small and contained, more mounding than the traditional catmint that a lot of us are used to that can get really big and flop over. This one stays a little bit smaller and it's a little bit easier to manage, and I'm really excited because it's drought tolerant, of course. Pollinators love the flowers, so it does super well around here. Also out here, I'm gonna put a lot of one of my other favorites, Millenium Allium. Now, allium, what's wonderful about it is, pollinators again love it. It's really drought tolerant once it's established. All of these plants are resistant. Rabbits don't like them. Squirrels don't like them. Deer don't like them. Not that I usually have those problems, but it's always good just in case. And then for a little bit larger plant, I'm gonna do some crazy blue Russian sage. Now, Russian sage, I used to feel like I hated, because I grew up with Russian sage that we kind of put in too confined of area and it would seem to get too big, and then we were trying to chop it back. But Russian sage just needs room to grow. But also there's some newer varieties that stay slightly smaller, and that's what's exciting. So I'm picking the crazy blue variety because it stays a little bit smaller, but it's gonna be more the center of the bed plant because it's gonna get a little bit larger still, have purple flowers later on in the summer. So all these hues are those silvery, leafy green tones with purple flowers at different times. And so I'm really excited. So what I'm going to do is start by laying them out, just sitting the plants here. Now this has been exposed soil for, it's been quite like over a month now, or 2 months almost. And you can tell little bits of grass every so often are starting to come up, and that's why I want to get things planted. And then in a separate video, I'm going to mulch this really well. But I have landscape lighting and I left the wires exposed because since I'm going to be planting, I want to make sure I know where the wiring is, and then I can hide it once everything is planted. So what I like to start by doing is taking my perennials. Now these get the largest. So you want to see what size your items get and then start laying them out. So I know that these get a little bit larger, so I'm going to put them in the center of the bed so I can plant more perennials around the perimeters and have these in the center get taller. So I'm going to start laying things out, and then I'll kind of discuss my method, if there is a method, and we'll kind of see what I'm doing. So as you can see, I've laid the plants out, and what I do is I like to plant things in small masses. So I'm doing repeating groupings of about 5 or 10 plants at a time. And I'm keeping them the like type every 5 or 10 because then once they bloom, you get this sea of profuse color that will look a lot more striking and give a higher impact. So I started over here with Millenium Allium. I like Millenium Allium because they're a little bit smaller, so they stay in that 16 to 20 inch range, which means that they'll be good here in the front of the bed and they'll get a nice clump. Now I space these about 16 inches apart because I like to go in the low end of the 16 to 20 inch range so they almost touch or slightly overlap once they actually grow into a full mound. Next up, I have the cat's PJs. They get about the same size as the allium, so they'll look really good to be in the same sight line and the same row. And also I spaced them about that 16 inch mark, hoping that they eventually almost touch or slightly overlap in their mounds. So this in mass planting will really look like a sea of color. I think a great way to have high impact is to choose perennials that are lower cost than larger shrubs or things and plant them in mass because they look so good. What's great about perennials is they die back to the ground every year. So in the spring, just mow it off and they'll come back fresh. So behind all this, I have that crazy blue Russian sage, which gets a little bit taller. It can get a little bit over like that 24 inch mark. So it will stand up above the things in front, give kind of the same color of foliage with a different texture. But this is, I think, a really good thing to watch for. So when you're going to buy perennials, you can choose beautiful, large, growing perennials. This one, it cost about $25. It's pretty pricey because it was growing so large. But you can also find, and I just think this is a good thing to see, you can find what looks like a pretty puny, almost sad looking perennial, but guess what? This is the exact same type. So, more cost effective. Sometimes you can find this for $5.99 or $6.99 depending on these small types. And this is a lot more cost effective. And guess what? In a season or two, you're not gonna know the difference which one you planted. So if you wanna be more cost effective, look for small starts of perennials in the spring, and you can do a lot more of them and plant a lot more. Same with these. You can find these in really large pots like this. They'd be a lot more expensive. So if you start with smaller starts like this, you'll be able to do it no problem. So now what I wanna do is, you can see, if you swing around, I'm gonna get these waves of color that keep repeating all around this bed. So as you drive in or drive past on the road, or even just from me being in my yard, I'm gonna really be able to enjoy these swaths of color. And then in the next season or two, these mounds will get larger. So now I just need to start planting. Now, usually I like to put biotone when I'm planting. You know I love Espoma Biotone. It's a good starter. Since I'm doing so many small holes, I will throw a little bit into each hole, but then afterwards, I'm gonna use some just some Espoma Plant Tone. And this I'm gonna sprinkle then on top of the bed once I'm done, just so it slowly feeds the bed a little bit. Just when it's a new bed, I like to add something like this that I've never added compost to or anything, just to help it get going. So I'm gonna start digging holes. I'm gonna add some biotone to each one, and I'm gonna break them up as I do, which I'll show you, and hopefully this will be planted soon. So on these larger ones, obviously the hole will be slightly larger, but this is good soil out here. So I don't have to worry, thankfully, about clay or rocks. You can see from this soil, I mean, look at that. That's pretty gorgeous here. And in Iowa, southeast Iowa here, I'm pretty lucky to have a lot of soil like this. So once I dig that hole, I make sure to put a little bit of biotone. Now, I'm gonna admit, years ago, I used to never do things like this. I thought it was an expense I didn't need to have. But the thing is, you notice a difference. When you add some type of starter, it really just helps get those roots acclimated and helps them invigorate and get going a lot quicker to establish themselves in the ground. So I sprinkle some of that in, then I pull that out of the pot, and now I will always be in the camp that says to break these roots up slightly. When roots get really tight, and when they get encircling, it's really hard for them. They have like a muscle memory. It's hard for them to branch out and go into the soil. I wanna break them up so they're stimulated to wanna branch outwards into the native soil. So you can see I'm popping that in the hole. It sits just slightly higher than my native soil. That is important. You never wanna plant a plant too deep. If you plant it too deep, the crown will be below the soil line, and then you water it, it could rot the top off. You don't wanna do that. So now that I have that done, I'm gonna put the soil back around it. I won't water these till I have them all done because I don't wanna be working in mud, but I will put the soil back around it and make sure to get it in and around as much as I can, because you don't want those roots to dry out. And then when we water it, the air bubbles will be worked out. So this is perfect. If you want to, you can really quickly make a little moat around it, so when you do water it, it holds the water well. But now I have I don't know, maybe 100 others to plant, and then we'll be done. I'm doing the final 2 perennials. So, and honestly, yes, it takes some time, but think of the years of beauty it's gonna have. Now, as I'm doing these, you're gonna see that what these will also detract from here in the near future is behind me are very winter burned green giant arborvitae. Now, there is a possibility they could come out of it because they can be really late after they're so severely winter burned. But instead, I'm just gonna look at the beauty here because we're gonna have to assess what I do with those and maybe replacing them. So these last 2, when I take them out of the pot, these 2 are really tight. I'm just gonna give them a good rough. Look how I'm even removing half of that soil. Don't be scared of doing that. This is what I've always done for years. It's what a lot of landscapers do. And it really does just help stimulate that growth and get it going right away. So once I get these right in these holes, you can see I put the biotone in there, the plants in there. I then have been going around and I've been sprinkling some plant tone. So plant tone is just a good organic fertilizer that's just gonna slowly feed all of these plants, but also just kind of help amend the soil to be a little bit more healthy. You know, I always view it like this. Organic, yeah, it's a buzzword, I get it. But you know what? Just like our bodies, the better things we put into it, the better outcome you're gonna get. So instead of stimulating these plants with synthetics that will overstimulate them, I'm just using the organic plant tone, and this is a great way to supplement yearly if you want to. Once you have that laid out, you can lightly rake, or honestly, you can just water it in. Like I said, in a week here, when I get my mulch finally, I'm gonna start mulching this bed, but guess what? I like to plant things in a new bed before I mulch it, because I don't wanna get all that soil and mulch mixed together, which then will just have weeds in the mulch. You don't want that. So we'll talk about that in another video. But now the big thing is what? Watering. Let's make sure we start watering all these plants. So I brought my hose over, because there's no way I'm hand watering all these plants. Now, like I said, these are drought tolerant plants, but that's not until they're established. Right now, they have a pretty weak root system, and they really need to be watered well right away, because one, mulch isn't on them yet. It's really windy. We're actually in a abnormally hot period for spring. We're in the 80s and 90s right now. That's way too hot. So I'm gonna make sure to water them well and keep them watered. It could mean daily if it stays this windy. And if it cools off, the water won't evaporate as quickly and I may not need to. But I'm gonna make sure they're evenly moist. Now this is a really well draining area. In general, you wanna know that when you're gonna plant things. And if you don't know if your area is well draining, what you can do is dig a hole, put water in it. A well drained area, within a couple hours, 1 to 2 hours, that water should be gone. If in 1 to 2 hours that water is still standing in the hole, it's probably not a well-draining area. One, then you would need to pick more water-loving plants. You could start amending your soil with compost, maybe even with some sand, some things like that that will help it drain better. But this is a good draining area, so these I could water close to every day if it gets really hot and dry. Otherwise, maybe a few times a week. It will just depend when they dry out. So I'm gonna water everything really well, and then we'll be done. I'm finishing up on the last plant. So for these smaller perennials, I'm doing like, a couple quarts probably of water. You know what I try to do to know how much water I'm giving is I take my hose and I fill up like a gallon, say, but I count as I'm doing it. And then I know 30 seconds usually equal a gallon. That way when I'm going around watering things, I can kind of roughly know how much water I'm giving. So for larger plants, I might do close to a gallon. It just depends on the size. But these are all now really well watered. Like I said, future video here, we're gonna be mulching. And mulching, I have a lot of thoughts on, so we're gonna be talking about that. But now I can clean up. This is done for a while until my mulch delivery comes, but I have more plants to plant, don't worry, this isn't all. So I hope you're maybe inspired and excited about some plants. That's the whole point of this. And as always, I hope you share these videos around, because guess what? If this guy in Iowa can do it, anybody can do this. We can all plant plants, make a greener, healthier, happier world, get our hands in the dirt. That's what it's all about. And check my website, wyseguide.com, for not only planting things, but for recipes. I have lots of food on there from what I grow in my garden, and it all happens on Wyse Guide. So until next time, go buy some plants.